Yeah, well, I think I've had many role models throughout my career and my life. I think for me, for whatever reason, I decided at a very young age I wanted to be a doctor in preschool, and that was a little different because there's no medical people in my family at all. So I'm not sure where I came up with the idea, but my family was really supportive of that idea. I did grow up in an academic family, so my dad was a professor and my mom was a university librarian, so I was in that environment and had an appreciation for research and teaching, and knew that I, probably wanted to go into some sort of academic medicine someday. But I think if you had asked me in undergraduate school or medical school if I was going to be running a lab and doing bench research, I never would have dreamed that I would be doing that. I was very focused on becoming a physician at the time. So it wasn't really till my pediatrics residency when I saw other physicians doing science and having labs, particularly female physicians, that I thought, well, maybe this is something I could do. It looks, really fun and interesting and impactful to the clinical care we provide. In particular, someone who's now one of my colleagues, Dr. Karen Fairchild, was really inspirational to me as a pediatrics resident. She, was a young neonatologist who had a family with kids, and she was running a lab, and I thought, wow, that's really amazing. So that was the first time I even thought of doing, science and having that as a really sort of major part of my career. So she really inspired me. And then I would say since then, I've had so many wonderful mentors and role models that I've been fortunate to have and, sort of watch how they do science, how they think, and how they manage a lab. And so they've all been really impactful role models to me, including my current mentor, who's just wonderful. So. Well, my lab and sort of my research ever since I was a pediatrics resident, which is when I first started getting interested in research, has been focused on neonatal brain injury, in particular neonatal hypoxic ischemic injury, which is a brain injury that can happen to a baby around the time of birth for various reasons. And one of the things I love about being both a physician and a scientist is getting to kind of see where the problems are, what questions I can ask out of my clinical work. And so one of the most both devastating but also frustrating diseases that we take care of in the NICU is babies with brain injury. And one of the reasons it's, frustrating is because we have very few tools to be able to predict outcomes of these infants, which is very frustrating for families and parents. It creates a lot of worry and anxiety for them taking their baby home and not knowing what the future holds. And I also, am inspired continuously by those families, by what they, do for their babies. But, one of the problems is we have very few therapies to help protect the brain in the neonatal period. And so really the only available treatment that we have for that disease right now in the NICU is therapeutic hypothermia. And that's still, even though it's had a huge impact on the outcome of these babies, it's not enough because there's still a lot of babies who are having, problems as they grow up. And so that's really inspired me in my lab work to really focus on looking at what's happening in the brain early on and how those early changes that happen with injury impact learning and memory outcomes long term. So that's really what the focus of my work has been. And we have a mouse model for the injury, and we do a number of different tests to look at changes in neuronal circuitry and how that impacts learning and memory and cognition long term. Well, I think that's one of the things I love about this lab, this bigger lab that I am in with, my mentor, Jadeep Kapoor, is that, there's so many PhDs, MDs, MD PhDs that we all have different perspectives. And like for me, I don't have a PhD, so I need, that sort of scientific reasoning, sort of all the things that PhDs get that MDs don't necessarily get. So I think working together is like perfect in my opinion. And so I try to talk about the clinical parts of it too to everyone in the lab who doesn't get that experience, just so they know that work is really impactful and important. So yeah, that's great. So I would say one of the biggest or hardest times for me in my career, one of the biggest obstacles was it was my second year on faculty when I had my first child, and at the same time I got my first NIH grant, which was all wonderful. Those are all wonderful things, of course, but I definitely underestimated how hard it would be to be a new mom and adjust to having a baby. Coming back to work and knowing that I needed to hit the ground running with that grant and that work in my lab was really stressful. So I think that year of finding balance at home as well as trying to be productive at work was really, really challenging. I think it's continued to be challenging to be a mom of young children and be productive at work, and that's definitely something that I think a lot of people experience. But you kind of learn, I think, ways to live with it and ways to, do the best you can in both places. I feel like it's something that people don't really talk about enough, how tough that is. So I think talking about it and normalizing it is something that I feel really passionate about, because I think that the more, we sort of talk about those transitions in life and how difficult and challenging they can be and that that's normal, I find that really helpful to hear from people who are successful. And I think as far as, if things would have been easier if I were a man, sometimes I think that for sure. I have an incredibly supportive partner. My husband is amazing and really splits the duties with me, but I do see, the impact of maternity leave and time away from the lab and time away, even with supportive colleagues and mentors, it still has impacted my productivity. There's no question. And sometimes I don't see that in my husband or some of my male colleagues, that they've had those impacts on their career trajectory for sure. So sometimes I think that it may be easier for sure if I was a man. And sometimes I feel like I'm doing a great job, in my clinical work or in the lab and just getting by at home, and then the reverse, I'm being a great mom, but at that point I'm not, doing as much as I should at my job. But I think in the end it all balances out. It's just whatever you need at the time and whatever your family and your work needs. So yeah, I think people just don't talk about it. I see this so much in our medical trainees too. Like they come back from having a baby and I can see they're struggling, but no one talks about it. And I think for me, one of the things that was helpful was for people I looked up to tell me that was normal and talk about their experience. Like that really made a huge difference to me to hear. So yeah. So I think a couple of things. I think having leadership that is can understand the challenges of being a woman in science and medicine. I think having leaders that represent who they lead is very important. And so I think one of the things that's discouraged me, and I hope to make changes, and I think this is a huge topic right now that's actively being discussed and worked on, is just the fact, at least within medicine, at least 50% or more of medical school graduates are female, but that just doesn't pan out when you look at the different levels of academic advancement, and certainly in leadership roles within medical schools and within academia in general. So the representation of females, particularly people of color, females of color, is really poor when you look at sort of full professors, chair positions, and medical school deans. I think it's wonderful that we've just gotten a medical school dean who's a female. I think that's really inspirational. But I think no matter who the leaders are, I think they need to learn to listen and try to understand the unique challenges of being a woman in science. The other thing that I would say is I think women being supportive of women within science, I think is something that can make a huge difference, just supporting each other and trying to really serve as mentors for other women, but also advocates and sponsors. So I think that those are some of the things that I feel need to be improved to really help encourage and inspire women to both go into medical science but stay in medical science, because that's another huge problem. Is I think people leave medicine, particularly women or women scientists, leave the academic world or the medical world, unfortunately. So I think that there's a lot of things that could be done to retain women in those realms, but also recruit them as well. So. Yeah, I think two things, and these were pieces of advice that were given to me as a trainee and student that I found really valuable. I think one thing is the importance of a mentoring sort of committee or a mentoring group of mentors. So I naively thought when I was, very early in my career that, you have one mentor, that's enough, that's great, that's wonderful. And certainly there are amazing people who can serve everything you need as a mentor at certain stages in your life. But what I came to realize is no one person can give you everything you need from a mentoring and sponsorship standpoint. So I have found it really helpful, and this is advice that I give, is I think it's great to have a number of different mentors for different reasons. And so I have an amazing research mentor, but also to have a life mentor, career mentor, and people that can really help you with different pieces of your career and life are really important, just to get different perspectives. So that's one piece of advice. The second piece of advice is, again, one that was given to me, but I loved it so much and it made a difference for me, was I have often had, students and trainees come to me when they're making a difficult life decision, whether that's to get another degree or to pursue a certain job offer or, change research paths, things like that. And I think particularly women, I have noticed, struggle with those decisions because they're very, and I struggle with this too, afraid of disappointing people or worried about not doing what somebody wants them to do that, has been invested in their career or helped them. And while I think it's important to, listen to everybody and sort of take their advice, at least into consideration, what I advise people and what I have used to help me make those decisions is, at the end of the day, you're the one living your life, right? And so you have to go home at night and be happy with what you're doing, where you are, what you're researching, what job you're doing, things like that. And so in the end, I think just making a decision that is going to make you happy, even if it is not necessarily what others want you to make, is the most important thing. And so that has been helpful for me when I'm making those decisions, and I think has been helpful to some of my students and mentees when they're struggling with decisions like that. So.